my name is Kathy Hannun, and I am the president and co-founder of Dandelion. What motivated me to build Dandelion is that buildings are responsible for about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, so that's just a huge fraction. And unlike electric vehicles or electricity generation, there really aren't a lot of companies already working to clean up those emissions. So for cars, you have companies like Tesla, and actually all the major car companies are now doing electric vehicles. For electricity, solar, wind, hydro, there are a lot of renewable resources that are already really taking off. But there aren't that many companies engaged in cleaning up the emissions in buildings, so it's a gap that really needs to be filled. There were quite a few challenges that I faced in the initial stages of building Dandelion. So first and foremost, fundraising was very difficult, especially for a company like this one that's bringing renewable energy to homes. It's just a sector and an industry that doesn't usually receive a lot of venture funding, and I had no experience fundraising, so that combination was tricky, to say the least. I think some other challenges I faced beyond the fundraising are, at the beginning you have a very, very, very small team, so it's really on you and your partners to figure out how to do everything. And with very little experience, no experience running a business before, I just had to learn a lot from square one, and that was tricky. I get the question a lot about what challenges I've faced, specifically because I'm a woman leader at Dandelion and in energy. And it's a difficult question for me because, of course, I've never had any other experience. So sometimes it's hard to separate what challenges have existed because of my gender and what have just existed for other reasons. But I would say one of the primary challenges has just been there aren't a lot of role models that look exactly like me. And I think when people say look like me, it's not physically look like me, it's just I didn't have too many examples in my life of other entrepreneurs that were concerned about having kids when they were starting their business like I did, or how to deal with being pregnant while fundraising, or just like what leadership could look like if your style is more collaborative and less commanding like mine is. So there were just a lack of examples, I would say, to model myself after. So I just had to make a lot up and try to make it in my style and something that would feel authentic to me. I don't believe everyone in the future will opt for a geothermal system for heating and cooling their homes. I do think almost everyone in the future will have a heat pump. So geothermal is actually just one type of heat pump. There are other heat pumps called air source heat pumps. The difference is geothermal heat pumps exchange heat with the ground, and air source heat pumps exchange heat with the air. Air source heat pumps are kind of like air conditioners that can run in reverse. And regions that are very cold in the winter and hot in the summer are good fits for geothermal. Regions that are pretty mild, like the Bay Area of California, for example, are better suited for air source heat pumps. Dandelion is starting with geothermal because there's just such a dire need for better heating solutions in places that have really cold winters, like the Northeast where we're based. But I think it's very possible that in the future, we could expand into other types of heat pumps as well. I do not think we will ever reach a day where we've exhausted all of the available fossil fuels. There will be many, it's just not likely that we would extract every last drop of oil, because the harder it is to extract oil, the more expensive it is. And the more expensive it is to extract oil, the more cost competitive renewables are. We're already seeing that often renewables are already less expensive than fossil fuels in the market. And so I think as time goes on and more value is assigned to renewables in the form of tax credits or a carbon price or other things like that, it will just become increasingly cost effective. And of course, just the costs come down precipitously as we're seeing solar panel costs come down, wind power costs come down. Whereas fossil costs, I think, are going to continue to rise. And I think that because there's, again, just like more policy reasons, like a carbon tax, for example, but also because over time it just becomes increasingly difficult to get at the fossil fuels that remain. So I think we're already at this point where we're going to see renewables just continue to grow and grow and grow in market share, and fossil fuels will be on the way out way before we ever get the last drop out of the ground. You know, I actually think this is one of the biggest issues of our time, because the climate that we live in and the temperature of the earth just like really affects every aspect of life. I mean, from mass migrations and having millions and millions and millions of people have to move and become migrants, to making it harder to grow food, to more disease outbreaks, to just like floods and storms and droughts and mayhem. There will just be all sorts of things that could happen, and we really have this opportunity now that's increasingly diminishing to fix some of our infrastructure so that we're not continuing to add to the problem and making it worse for future generations. So certainly Dandelion, the reason it's so important to me is because it fits into that mission, just to clean up our emissions so that we can live in a stable climate. When I'm not working, I spend all of my free time with my 1-year-old and my 2.5-year-old. They are a handful, but a very delightful handful, and they demand a lot of my attention. So when I'm not working, I'm usually hanging out with them. Three prerequisites to succeed as an entrepreneur are: 1, I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to give up, or it's just felt like incredibly hard and I've had to push myself to keep going. And so I think that ability to just resist giving up when things get hard, or I guess what people often say is just persistence, I really do believe that is one of the most important prerequisites, because there's I've never heard a story of an entrepreneur saying, oh yeah, that was actually pretty easy, it was smooth sailing from the beginning and then I was really successful. I've never heard that. It's always such a struggle, and podcasts like How I Built This are a good example of that. All of these companies that are so famous, that have done so well, and then you hear the founder stories and they're always incredibly difficult. So persistence is a must. I think another prerequisite or quality that's really helped me as an entrepreneur is it's good to have a mixture of confidence and humility. So confidence because you need to believe in yourself enough to take the risk and to try to do something hard. But humility because you will be bad at it often. Like there will be many mistakes will be made. Lots of hard decisions will be faced, and some of them you'll make correctly and some of them you won't. And I think if you're able to just accept that, yeah, you're an imperfect person and you're learning, and like you'll grow from all of this learning and get better over time, and you don't need to know all the answers today. Like if you can have that growth mindset, it will be much better than taking everything personally or feeling like you need to know all the answers at the beginning, because there's just no way that's going to happen. So I actually think, in a maybe counterintuitive way, humility is like giving yourself permission to be a work in progress and to know that you are in the process of learning, and that's not only totally acceptable but true of everyone and how it needs to be. And then maybe one final one, I would say being very resourceful is another great quality to have as an entrepreneur, because you will need help from so many different people, and you will need to be very creative because you don't have a lot of resources in order to accomplish your goal. So for me, this looked like everything from staying on my friends' couches and borrowing cars to figuring out how to get free office space for the company, to figuring out how to market what we were selling in a very low cost way at the beginning, to there's just like no end of examples of just trying to figure out how to stretch every resource you have to accomplish as much as possible. I mean, I think that, again, it's difficult for everyone to get financing to start their business, but as a woman, you're less likely to have a few advantages that are helpful. One of which is a network of people that are connected to that money. So I think men are more likely to be connected to friends who work in the largely male VC industry. Friends are colleagues. And then I also think investors want to pattern match. They want to look for entrepreneurs that remind them of entrepreneurs who've been very successful, which is understandable, except because there's always been such a lack of diversity in entrepreneurship, the people that remind venture capitalists of those who have been successful are largely young white men. So we need to break out of that cycle and give more women the opportunity to even be successful, so that pattern matching can become a more diverse exercise than it is today. And then I also think that, again, like because more men are just known as people who have started companies and been successful, it might be easier for a young man to look at an entrepreneur who has come before him and feel like, oh, that person did that, he's just like me, I can do it too. But there are fewer examples like that for women. You know, when I started Dandelion, Lynn Jurek, who's the founder and CEO of Sunrun, was the only woman that I knew of that had taken on a similar challenge to the one I wanted to take on. And I'm actually really lucky that she even exists, because it was great to have her as a role model and continue to have her as a role model. One big way that it's changed is I think people are just taking complaints of women, especially junior women, a lot more seriously. When I was starting out in my career, I certainly experienced sexual harassment from a more senior male executive, as did many women who I worked with. And even when we went to HR, nothing was done, because I think at that time it was more important to the company to retain this male executive than to protect the junior female employees. But I don't believe that would be the case today. I think if the same thing played out today, post metoo, that executive would have faced consequences, and that's a really great change for everyone. I would say that one thing I would just encourage anyone listening to this to do is just to try to imagine what you would do if you gave yourself permission to not limit yourself. Like, just think about what would your career look like if you weren't worried about imagining something that seemed too audacious. You just gave yourself permission to totally fantasize about whatever career you wanted, regardless of whether it seemed realistic. What would you be doing? And then just like ask yourself, is there any reason to not do that? Like, do you actually need to self-censor and not do that? An executive at Google X asked me that question when I was a junior marketing employee at X. He was like, what would you do if you could really do anything? And in my mind at that time, I knew what I would want to do. I would love to lead an X project. And it almost was embarrassing to even think that because it was so far away from what seemed possible for me. But he just encouraged me, like, just, take it seriously. Like, just try to do that. Just try to make that happen. And within 2 years of that, I was leading an X project and now leading a company in the field that I care about. And I don't know, I really am thankful that he asked me that question, because it was shocking how quickly I could go from just envisioning what I wanted to figuring out how to materialize it. But I don't know that I would have been able to do it if I hadn't given myself the permission to even want something that ambitious. So I just encourage everyone listening to this to not be afraid to go after your most ambitious vision for the future.